I'm filthy, inside out. Native girl said the rancher didn't care, 'cause he would change her life. The wind cut across the Dragoon foothills like a blade, sweeping dust over the rocks and into the mouth of the canyon. Jake Corbett reined in his horse when he heard it, a sound raw and human, half buried beneath the wind, down by a dry wash. A young Apache woman was fighting with a snare, her hands slick with blood as she tried to free a deer kicking itself to death. Sunlight burned across her shoulders. Sweat and then dust turned her skin to copper. When Jake stepped closer, she spun around, a knife flashing in her grip, eyes wild like a trapped coyote. Neither spoke. The deer gave one last shudder and went still. For a long moment, only the wind moved between them, carrying the scent of iron, smoke, and something neither of them had felt in years, the start of trust, or maybe danger. The foothills of the Dragoon stretched wide beneath a sky the color of tarnished brass. Wind scraped through the yucca and creosote, carrying the sour tang of dust and horse sweat. It was a land that did not forgive. The careless every rock could cut. Every shadow could hide something hungry. Jake Corbett had learned to respect it. Same way a man respected a loaded gun. He had come to this place 8 years ago, after the war chewed him up and spat him out. Once. He'd worn the blue of the Union Army, believed in flags and words like duty. Now, he believed in things he could touch, the weight of a shovel, the sound of rain on his roof, the breath of his mare when dawn broke. He kept to himself on a small spread tucked against the rocks, where the soil was stingy and the silence deep. Jake was tall, broad-shouldered, his face half hidden beneath a short beard. The sun had carved lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind that come from squinting into too much light and too many memories. A pale scar cut across his left shoulder, proof of both survival and regret. He carried few things from the past: a worn cavalry knife, a canteen, and a folded letter he never read anymore. The Apache woman he found that morning was the first soul he'd seen in days. Her name, he would learn later, was Kaya. At that moment, she looked more spirit than flesh, gaunt, barefoot, her hair tangled and heavy with grit. The deer lay still at her feet, and she stood over it like someone guarding the last piece of herself. When the wind blew, she didn't flinch. She simply tightened her grip on the knife, chin raised. Jake saw hunger in her, but also pride, the kind that refused to beg even when it hurt. He knew that look. It was the same one he'd carried after the war, when pity felt worse than pain. The sun climbed higher, baking the air. Flies gathered. Jake spoke first, his voice rough from disuse. "Need water?" Her answer came after a pause, quiet and flat. "Don't need anything." Still, her hands trembled as she cleaned the knife with a strip of cloth. He unscrewed his canteen, set it on a rock between them. "Then take it for the deer," he said. "Dead things don't need it either." Her gaze flicked to the water, then to him. The tension eased barely. Around them, the land shimmered in the heat. Two strangers stood in the same patch of dust, both too proud to ask, too tired to fight. Somewhere above, a hawk circled the canyon, patient, waiting. And for the first time in years, Jake Corbett felt the weight of silence shift into something living. Jake crouched beside the carcass, drawing his knife to cut the snare loose. The wire had bitten deep into the deer's leg, blood dark and sticky against the fur. Kaya tensed, knife still in hand, her breath sharp as flint. He worked slow, careful not to startle her, the motion of his blade steady and unhurried. When the deer's leg came free, it twitched once before going still. The woman muttered something in Apache, a few syllables that sounded like a prayer or a farewell. Jake didn't understand the words, but he recognized the tone respect for life taken. "You hunt alone?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. Her shoulders were narrow, and her ribs pressed hard against the skin. She bent down, touched the animal's flank, then drew her blade across its throat with a single clean stroke. Jake didn't flinch. He'd done the same too many times before. She began skinning the deer. Fast but clumsy hunger made her hands shake. He saw her glance once toward the saddlebag hanging from his horse, where a loaf of hard bread was tied, without a word. Jake broke the loaf in half and set it on a rock between them. Her eyes darted up, suspicious. "Why?" "Because you look like you haven't eaten in days." "I didn't ask. Didn't say you did." The wind sighed through the canyon, carrying a faint smell of blood and sage. For a moment, neither spoke. Then her stomach growled a small, desperate sound that seemed to shame her. She looked away, knife trembling slightly in her grip. Jake took a few steps back, keeping his hands visible. "Take it," he said simply. She hesitated. Then, like a cornered animal deciding the hunter had no trap, she snatched the bread and tore into it, chewing fast, eyes never leaving him. He waited until she slowed, until some color crept back into her face. "Got a name?" "Kaya. I'm Jake Corbett." She nodded once, curt. Her voice was rough but carried a strange dignity, the kind of tone that didn't beg, didn't yield. "Where's your camp?" he asked. "Gone." He understood what that meant: burned, scattered, or worse. The land was full of ghosts like her, people the world decided were inconvenient. As the afternoon wore on, they worked side by side without speaking. He helped her lift the deer onto a flat stone and taught her to cut it along the grain to make drying strips. She listened without responding, but her hands steadied. When the sun dropped lower, Jake gathered some dry mesquite and struck a spark. The small fire came alive, snapping at the wind. Kaya stepped back instantly, wary. "I'm not staying," she said. "Didn't ask you to." But when he poured coffee from his tin cup, she watched every motion like it was a ritual from another world. The scent of roasted beans drifted between them. He held the cup toward her. "It's bitter, but it helps the night pass." She shook her head. "You don't know what I am. Maybe not, but I know what hunger looks like." Her lips pressed tight. After a long silence, she took the cup, sipped once, coughed at the taste, then sipped again. The firelight caught the side of her face, the smudge of dirt across her cheek, the sharpness of her jaw, the scar near her ear. She looked nothing like the frightened thing he'd first seen. Night deepened, and coyotes howled in the distance. Jake tossed another stick into the flames. Kaya crouched across from him, still alert, but her eyelids drooped with exhaustion. He said softly, almost to himself, "It's a long walk to nowhere. You can rest by the fire tonight." She hesitated, eyes narrowing. "You think I'll thank you? No," he said. "Just think you're tired." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she sat, pulling her knees to her chest, the firelight flickering over her face. Neither of them spoke again. Above, The stars gathered over the canyon cold, ancient, and silent witnesses to two people who no longer trusted the world but were, for one night, no longer alone. 3 days passed before Jake saw her again. He was mending the fence along the northern ridge when a faint curl of smoke rose above the rocks. Following it, he found Kaya crouched by a small pit, drying strips of venison on a rack of willow branches. The sight made him stop. She'd survived. Barely. But she had. "You're still here," he said. Her eyes flicked up, wary. "You thought I'd vanish?" "Most folks do." She shrugged, thin shoulders rising under a ragged shawl. "Maybe I should have." Jake looked over the small camp, the half-burnt logs. The hides stretched to cure, the neat rows of meat drying in the sun. It wasn't much, but it was the kind of work that kept a person alive. He set down his tools. "There's room at my place. Roof don't leak. Could use a hand before winter." Kaya's lips tightened. "You'd let an Apache live under your roof." Jake met her eyes. Wouldn't be the first time two people tried to survive the same storm. She let out a small, bitter laugh. "And what would people say? They'll talk no matter what I do." She studied him for a long while, as if searching for the lie. Then her voice softened, not gentle, but stripped of armor. "You don't know what I am. I know you're hungry and stubborn." Her jaw clenched. "I'm filthy," she whispered, "inside out." The words hung between them, raw as the wind that scraped over the rocks. Jake didn't answer right away. He simply crouched, picked up a handful of dirt, and let it run through his fingers. "This land's filthy too," he said quietly, "but things still grow here if you give them a chance." Kaya turned away, as though afraid to let him see her face. After a moment, she muttered, "I'll help with your fence, that's all." He nodded. "That's a start." By evening they rode together, her barefoot heels pressing against the horse's flank. When the cabin came into view, a single-story shack nestled between yucca and juniper, she looked at it as if it were something unreal. Smoke drifted from the chimney, steady and pale. Inside, the place smelled of leather, ash, and coffee. She stayed by the doorway, clutching her bundle. Jake motioned toward the table. "Sit. You can eat first." "I said I'd work, not beg. I didn't say it was charity," he replied. "I'm paying you in stew." Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. She sat, hands in her lap, until the steam from the pot reached her face. They ate in silence. Each bite seemed to anchor her back to life. When she was done, she wiped the spoon carefully and placed it exactly where she'd found it. That night, she curled up by the hearth with a blanket he left out. Jake sat at the table, repairing a saddle strap, pretending not to notice how she kept her back to him. But when the wind moaned through the cracks, he rose and tossed another log into the fire. The orange light washed over her hair, catching the dust and copper tones in it. She whispered, thinking he couldn't hear, "Why are you kind to me?" Jake paused with his hand on the poker. "Because nobody was, when I needed it." Days passed into a rhythm. Kaya rose before dawn, fetching water from the creek and helping in the corral. Jake showed her how to tie feed bundles and patch broken boards. She taught him how to spot healing herbs along the ridge. When he nicked his hand on a nail, she pressed a poultice of crushed leaves to the cut. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked. "My mother," she said, gaze lowered. She used to say plants remember kindness. She sounds like she was wise. She was killed for it. The quiet that followed was thick and long. Jake didn't ask more, and Kaya didn't explain. But later that night, he found her outside, tracing the stars with a stick in the dirt, whispering names to them. Winter crept closer one afternoon. When clouds gathered low, Jake brought out a battered book, a Bible left from the chaplain who'd once shared his tent during the war. "Can you read?" he asked. She shook her head. He pointed to the word home on the page. "This one," he said, "means where you belong." Kaya tried to shape the word on her tongue. "Home," she murmured, hesitant, as if afraid it would vanish. He smiled faintly. "That's it." She looked up at him, a flicker of something unguarded passing through her eyes. "Home," she said again, more certain this time. "A place where no one spits on your name, and where you don't have to pretend," Jake added, for a heartbeat. Neither moved. The firelight trembled between them like a living thing. Then she turned away, her voice low. "Maybe one day." Outside, the wind carried the first breath of snow down from the mountains. Jake stepped to the door, watching her silhouette against the fading light, small, defiant, alive. And for the first time since he'd come to the Dragoons, he didn't feel the ache of being alone. He felt something else, quieter but heavier, the beginning of belonging. By early December, the wind over the Dragoon foothills had turned sharp and mean, blowing grit against the cabin walls until every breath tasted of dust. Jake had almost finished the new fence line when he heard the first rumor carried by a ranch hand from town who came to trade salt for jerky. "They're talking about you down in Dry Creek," the man said, shifting uneasily in the saddle. "Say you've got yourself an Apache woman up here." Jake kept his tone even. "You believe everything you hear, don't have to. Dunn does." The name sat in the air like gunpowder. Caleb Dunn, big landholder, quick temper, and the kind of man who thought owning something made it right. That night, when Kaya came in from feeding the horses, Jake told her what he'd heard. She froze, a strip of hair falling over her face. "He'll come," she said quietly. "He always does." Jake looked at her, then the calm in her voice more frightening than panic. "He hurt you before, didn't he?" She didn't answer, but the tremor in her hand spoke for her. The next week brought more whispers. The storekeeper stopped selling to Jake. The sheriff, Miles Quaid, dropped by under the guise of checking brands on the herd. "Folks don't take kindly to mixing blood out here," he said, eyes darting toward the house. "Word is, that girl's trouble." "She's not trouble," Jake replied. "She's just human." The sheriff sighed. "That's what makes it trouble." One afternoon, Kaya was hanging wet laundry behind the house when she saw 3 riders crest the ridge. Their silhouettes were dark against the glare. Dunn and 2 of his hands, Silas Pritchard and Hank Crow. She dropped the cloth and ran inside. "Jake," she said, breathless. "He's here." Jake stepped out onto the porch, revolver at his hip, but his hand loose. Dunn reined up a few yards away, his horse snorting, eyes cold and mocking beneath the brim of his hat. "Well, I'll be damned," Dunn drawled. "Didn't think I'd find her this easy. She ran off owing me a month's wage." "She doesn't owe you a thing," Jake said. Dunn spat into the dust. "That's so. A squaw who steals from her boss. And now she's shacked up with a Yankee deserter." Kaya flinched, but didn't move behind him. She stood beside Jake, barefoot in the dust, face pale but steady. "Get off my land. Done," Jake said evenly. "This ain't your land anymore. Corbett, town's turned on you. Ain't nobody'll stand in your way." Jake's voice lowered. "Maybe not, but you're still standing on my dirt." Dunn's eyes narrowed. His hand hovered over his gun. "You think she's worth dying for?" Jake's jaw tightened. "No, but I won't let you treat her like something you can own." The silence that followed was thick as thunder. Then Dunn drew. The shot cracked the air a flash. A scream. Jake stumbled back, clutching his shoulder. Kaya cried out, darting forward before he could stop her. But another gunshot split the air, this one not Dunn's. A young man on horseback had appeared from the trees, rifle smoking. It was Matthew Hale, the blacksmith from town, Jake's only friend. "Put it down," Dunn Hale shouted. "You've done enough damage." Dunn's men hesitated. Crow's gaze flicked between them, loyalty bending under fear. Dunn sneered. "You gonna side with a half-breed and a washed-up soldier?" Hale cocked the rifle again. "I'm siding with what's right. For a long, brittle moment, it could have gone either way." Then Dunn cursed, jerked his reins, and rode off, his men following close behind. The wind swallowed the sound of hooves, leaving only the smell of gunpowder and blood. Kaya dropped to her knees beside Jake, pressing a hand to his wound. "You fool," she whispered, voice shaking. "Why didn't you move?" "Didn't want to give him the satisfaction. Always proud," she muttered, tearing her sleeve to wrap the bleeding shoulder. "Always stubborn." He answered weakly. She almost laughed through the tears. "Don't you dare die. Jake Corbett." He managed a faint grin, not planning on it. Hale helped them inside, lit the stove, and stayed until Jake's breathing steadied. Before he left, he said quietly, "Town's divided. Dunn won't let it go. But the preacher's with you. Some folks too." Jake nodded. "Appreciate it." When the door shut, Kaya sank to the floor beside the bed. The lamplight flickered across her face streaked with ash, dirt, and tears. She whispered something in Apache, a string of sounds low and rhythmic, like a chant. Jake stirred. "What's that mean?" She looked up. "It means keep the fire. Don't let it die." Days passed. Jake couldn't lift his arm, so Kaya took over the chores tending the animals, cooking, standing guard at night with his Winchester across her lap. Sometimes she looked at him sleeping and felt the strange ache of something fragile but alive. One evening, he woke to find her sitting by the fire, hair loose, lips moving silently as she mended his torn shirt. "You should have left when he came," he said softly. Her fingers paused. "I told you before. I'm done running." Jake smiled faintly. "Then we've both got something to prove." She looked up, meeting his gaze, for once. Neither of them looked away. The crackle of the fire filled the space between them, no longer cold, no longer distant. But the reprieve didn't last. 2 nights later, the horses screamed. Kaya rushed outside to find the barn engulfed in flames. Fire roaring against the wind. "Jake," she shouted. He staggered out, bandage dark with blood. Together they fought the blaze, dragging buckets from the trough, choking on smoke. Sparks burned their clothes. The night a chaos of orange and ash. When at last the roof caved in, the light died, leaving only the smell of char and sweat. They stood side by side, panting, covered in soot. Kaya's voice broke the silence first. "He did this. Jake nodded. Yeah, but he won't do it again. She turned to him, eyes wet but fierce. I'm not afraid anymore. He met her gaze. His face streaked black with smoke. Good, he said, because I'm done living alone. When dawn came, smoke still rose from the wreckage. Jake sat on the porch steps, arm in a sling. Kaya brought him coffee in a tin cup. Done'll come again, she said. Jake sipped slowly. Then we'll be ready. The wind carried the smell of burnt wood down into the valley, where the town waited, half of it watching, half pretending not to, for the first time. Neither of them bowed their heads. The barn was nothing but black ribs of timber by morning, the smell of smoke still clinging to the cold air. Jake sat on the porch with his arm in a sling, eyes on the hills. Kaya moved quietly around him, gathering what could be salvaged tools. A few half-burnt boards, a bucket warped by heat. Every step she took made the silence heavier. When she finally stopped, her voice came soft, but steady. He wanted to break you. Jake looked up. He broke the barn instead. Kaya knelt to check the bandage on his shoulder. You shouldn't be moving. He gave a half smile. You sound like you own the place. Her fingers paused. No, I don't own anything. Neither do I, he said. Just trying to keep what's decent alive. For a while. They said nothing. The morning wind brushed ash into the yard, and the horses whickered softly from the corral. Then Kaya sat beside him, pulling her shawl tighter. I could leave, she murmured, before they come again. You could, Jake said. But you won't. She turned to him, startled. How do you know that? Because you already decided not to run the night the fire started. He glanced at her, a faint smile under his beard. And because you're stubborn, as I am. Her lips twitched, the ghost of a laugh escaping. You make it sound like a virtue. Maybe it is, he said. Out here, it's what keeps people alive. That evening, the wind changed. Snow fell thin and silent, softening the ruins of the barn. Jake sat by the hearth, the bandage clean and white against his bare chest. Kaya ladled soup into a bowl and brought it to him. He watched her hands move gentle, deliberate. You don't have to do all this. She met his gaze, eyes catching the firelight. I know. Then why stay? She hesitated, then said quietly, because for the first time, I'm not afraid of staying. He took the bowl, steam fogging the air between them. I'm glad. When he tried to thank her, she shook her head. Don't. You gave me a roof, food, work. I'm not used to being treated like someone worth saving. Jake's voice dropped low. You're not something to be saved, Kaya. You're someone who deserves to live. She blinked hard, as if holding back tears. Then she stood, went to the window. Outside, the snow glowed faintly under the moonlight. Back in my village, she said, we believed winter cleanses what's been hurt. The earth sleeps, and when it wakes, it remembers who it wants to be. Jake nodded slowly. Maybe that's true for people too. She looked over her shoulder, a faint smile touching her lips. You think the earth forgives us? He leaned back in the chair, the firelight flickering across his tired face. Maybe not, but it lets us keep trying. When dawn came, the storm had passed. The hills glistened under a crust of frost. Kaya walked outside, wrapped in a blanket, her breath rising in small white clouds. Jake followed her, careful with his injured arm. They stood where the barn had burned. The ground still dark, but no longer smoking. "I can rebuild it," he said quietly. "Will take time. I'll help," she answered. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time saw no fear in her posture, no hesitation, just resolve. "You already have." She met his eyes. "You think this place can forgive what happened here?" Jake glanced at the horizon where sunlight spilled over the red mesas. "Forgiveness isn't the land's job," he said. "It's ours." That night, a knock sounded on the door. It was Matthew Hale, coat dusted with snow, hat in hand. "Sheriff Quade's gone to Tucson," he said. "Dunn's hiding out in the valley, but the preacher's been speaking for you both. Folks are listening now." Jake's brow furrowed. "Didn't think they'd care." "Maybe they didn't," Hale said, "until they saw someone stand up for what's right." He looked past Jake to Kaya, who stood by the hearth. "You're both welcome at Sunday service if you want. Ain't many would dare say that, but Hill means it." When he left, the cabin felt quieter than before, but not empty. Kaya stared into the fire for a long time, then whispered, "They'll never see me like they see you." Jake stepped closer, his hand brushing her sleeve. "Maybe they don't need to. Maybe they'll just see us." She looked up at him, the distance between them measured only in breath. "You really believe that I have to," he said. "Otherwise, the war never ended." The fire cracked softly. Kaya's eyes glimmered as she leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then keep the fire, Jake. Don't let it die." He nodded. "Not while you're here to remind me, outside." The snow fell again, gentle as ash, covering the scars of what had burned. Inside, two people sat side by side, no promises spoken. But something stronger forged in the quiet, the understanding that neither salvation nor peace had to come from others. Sometimes it came from staying. Sunday came with the faint scent of thaw in the air. Snow still clung to the edges of the trail when Jake saddled his horse. Kaya watched him from the porch, shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. "You don't have to go," she said. He met her eyes. "If I don't, they'll write the story for us." Kaya hesitated, then stepped down from the porch. "Then I'm going too." Jake started to protest, but she shook her head. "I won't hide anymore." They rode together toward Dry Creek Junction, the valley slowly waking under the pale light. When they reached the town, conversation died on the boardwalks. People stopped women at the well, men outside the saloon, their stares sharp and quiet. Kaya felt every gaze like a blade, but Jake rode on, straight-backed, unflinching, until he stopped in front of the small white church at the end of Main Street. Inside, the preacher's voice faltered when the door opened. Heads turned. Jake walked down the aisle with Kaya beside him, boots echoing against the wooden floor. He removed his hat and said, loud enough for all to hear, "I've killed for things I don't believe in, for flags, for pride, for men who lied. But this woman has done nothing wrong. If there's sin here, it's mine for not standing sooner." No one moved. Even the old clock above the altar seemed to pause. Then Reverend Hill stepped down from the pulpit. "The good book says truth shall make us free," he said. "And what's truer than a man who won't let hate decide who he can care for?" The words rippled through the congregation. Some faces hardened, others softened. And when Jake reached for Kaya's hand, no one spoke against it. Outside, Sunlight broke through the thin clouds, spilling gold across the street. Hale stood by the hitching post, hat over his chest. "Town'll talk," he said. Jake smiled faintly. "Let them. By spring." Dunn had been caught trying to flee south and was hauled to Tucson in irons. Pritchard's store closed. His credit dried up. Life in the valley began to settle again. Slower, but cleaner. One morning, a wagon rolled up the hill to the Corbett Ranch townsfolk, both white and Apache, carrying wood, nails, and sacks of grain. Hale was among them, his sleeves rolled up. "Might as well build something better," he said. "That's what folks do after fire." Kaya stood by the doorway, stunned. Even the children came laughing, chasing each other through the yard, their footprints crossing lines the adults once drew in stone. When the new barn was raised, Reverend Hill planted a wooden sign at the creek below Promise Creek. "Because this place keeps its word," he said. That night, Jake and Kaya sat on the porch, watching the last light fade behind the mesas. A faint purple hue spread over the grass, the same color as the wildflowers sprouting along the fence. Kaya held a small wooden cup in her hands, one Jake had carved from cedar, the word "ours" etched rough but deep across it. She traced the letters with her thumb. "You know," she said softly, "the day you found me, I just wanted meat to stay alive. I never thought I'd find a reason to live." Jake turned to her, his eyes calm, steady. "And I thought I only needed land and silence. Turns out, I needed someone who still believes in what's real." The wind brushed past, carrying the scent of spring and faint wood smoke. Below them, at Promise Creek, the water ran clear again, children's laughter mixing with the song of the breeze. Kaya leaned her head against Jake's shoulder. "Maybe the land remembers kindness after all," she whispered. Jake smiled. "Then let's keep reminding it." And as the sun sank behind the dragoons, the world seemed softer, not clean, not pure, but honest. Out of dust and ruin, something had bloomed.